Thank you so much. I hope we can live up to all of that. Yes, this is very exciting. Eric and I both work for the New York Times, have never met in person, so today is the day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she just reminded me, congratulations on your beard award.
Oh, well, thank
wow.
you.
Yeah. That was very recent, yeah.
So your cookbook is amazing.
Thank
I'm
you.
so excited to have a chance to ask you about it. The subtitle is, so it's Korean American Food That Tastes Like Home.
Mm-hmm.
But what is home? Already in the title, Korean American, we have two heritages,
Yes.
two inheritances, two experiences.
Right.
So what is home to you?
Yeah.
There may be technical difficulties. Is that better? Should I repeat everything I just said? All right. What is home?
So you asked, what is home? Okay, so I think the circumstances of the cookbook resulted in the subtitle and the title of the book because we didn't have a title until the last minute. And when I say last minute, I'm saying like, wow, third edit, like it's going to print soon. We're like, we need a title.
Did you have you had like a list of titles?
The working title was Korean American, so we like left that, but then the subtitle was the hard part.
Mm.
It was like 100 family recipes or blah, blah, blah. But then I think it was, really thinking about the process of writing the book, which was going back home to Atlanta and cooking with my mother and also really examining not just my own, birth home, but also my mother's and the intersections between the two. My mother grew up in South Korea and she was born in Seoul. And I don't know, I kind of realized when I was back home that our Atlanta house had residences of Korea. And so I think that's something that I was trying to explore. And also the concept of home can be cheesy and a little rote and cliche. And I was really worried about making that a crux of the book. But I think the essays were just like inherently about home, and I like really, I don't know, there was like 15,000 words that were cut from the manuscript that were also about home. So I had a lot to say, and I didn't know that I would have so much to say, but that happens, I think, when you're like an adult, and then you suddenly move back home as a 30-year-old, or like, I was like 28 at the time, I think, but I moved back home, and people usually don't do that. And I think the pandemic saw a lot of young adults moving back home, and that was something that I thought was a real gift, and I wanted to encapsulate it into language. And so there was a moment when my editor and I were emailing back and forth, and I think she suggested recipes that taste like home, and I was like, what about food that tastes like home? And then we landed there, but it was it really all came together last minute. And
Well, I kind of love, this is like a peek at how the sausage is made, which is in the world of publishing, because our cookbook also, Philippine X was the working title, but we kept thinking there would be another title at some point.
Right.
That just never happened.
That's
But
good.
often I feel like, so your working title, Korean American, you knew that this is what the book was about.
Yeah, I think so. I think originally it was called The Essentials of Korean American Cooking. And I kind of like to tell the story like this, which is when I started writing the book, I didn't know anything about Korean cooking. I mean, people think that you get a book deal because you're an expert on something, but I think writing the book makes you the expert. So I went in, wanting to write a book that was really removed from like a third-person perspective, and I was like, this book is about my mother. It's going to be a profile of her, and in many ways, it did turn out to be that way. But I think it was my agent, my editor, kind of, regurgitating my drafts that I would send her. She was like, I think this is about you, and I hated that idea. But I think it made sense because it was exactly the way to explain Korean American, which the way I explain it is that the American is me and the Korean part is my mother. So it was sort of a nice way to explain that dynamic. But on the other hand, too, as I was writing, the introduction, which I wrote at the very end of the process, which, did you do that? It was like always at the end, right?
You always do the last thing.
Oh my God, it's the hardest thing to write. But I realized that Korean was an adjective for American. And I wanted people to know that there's a reason there's not a hyphen there. Korean American is not a lesser American or like a more diluted American. It's like, it is a type of American. So I think that's something that I wanted to explain. And you know, going back to my mother, we are products of our, you know, parents. And so even though I am the American part, I'm also, you know, I have influences from, woo! I haven't talked about my book in a while, and usually what happens is I like get into like teary-eyed mode, talk about my mom. But, so you only get one of those a night. But yeah, I think that was a huge realization for me, because I had felt so, I don't know, debilitated for so many years, straddling both identities, you know. I mean, it's really hard being a Korean person who looks Korean, but also being an American person who doesn't really identify with, you know, the parents' country and cuisine, or in cuisine, to be frank, and also the culture. And so it took writing this book to really feel that I could finally fuse the two together. And so in the end, that working title, Korean American, was just kind of perfect, I think, yeah.
Well, it's so interesting you talk about the hyphen. So this has been a bit of a battle, actually, with the Times. So for many,
oh my God,
it was always hyphenated, Asian American, and that just changed. I guess it was AP style that changed, actually.
Oh, did AP style change?
So this was a very recent, and it's just been a battle, because the hyphenation always suggests lesser. Why can't you just be two things? And actually, that's an abundance.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And it's interesting, too, you talk about your mom being the Korean side. So this experience of being Asian American is also different for our parents than it is for me. I'm older than you, and for your generation, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like Kathy Park Hong calls it Asian American 2.0. Oh,
I like that. Yeah.
But maybe, I mean, could you talk a little bit about, you know, so your parents' experience versus your experience?
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that's actually really interesting is, you know how I said that there are kind of nuances in my Korean Americanness. There are also nuances in my mother's Korean Americanness. So like, you know, even though she is, I just, you know, it's a neat way to say that she's the Korean side, but she's also a Korean American, you know. She moved here in 1984. And she took the citizenship test, became a citizen, and she voted for the first time last year, which is great. I helped her. But, and we won. Anyway, sorry. Okay, sorry, that was like, okay. But basically my mother was, I think interviewing her and talking to her as a source, and my father as a source, because, you know, our dinner tables were full of conversations about the foods we were eating, and frankly, the foods we were eating for a whole year were from the book, because, you know, and they got sick of it at the end. But I think one thing that I really realized was that my parents have a Korean American story too, and telling their version of the story was a great joy, because I think they had a very specific experience, which is the experience of an Atlantean Korean American, and that, you know, it stems from a historical circumstance. Like, I think what's really fascinating when you dive into your own cultural history, your own personal history, you know, you think you're special, but you're really not. And I think the one thing I really learned was that the Atlanta Korean American experience, it really grew the most in the 1980s, and you know, that's exactly when my parents came over. It also grew in Atlanta because after the LA riots, people had to leave, and a lot of them came over to Atlanta. And I think about that all the time, and how I took my childhood for granted, when in reality, the reasons we were there were so interesting, you know? And some reasons were very delicious. And I think those are the things I wanted to explore. And I think that's what you'll get in the book. I really love encouraging people to read it from cover to cover, not because the words are like so precious or anything, but because I think it tells like a very specific story, and I want people to know that this is one story in the greater like pantheon of the Korean American experience. And because the experience that you often hear about is the LA one or the Jersey one, but the Atlanta one is very, very particular.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's you can read a cookbook like a novel, and this one certainly is worthy of that. I'm curious, so I happened to run into somebody who went to the same high school as you.
Really?
The other day, Nancy Coleman, who works at the Times. But she was a little younger than you. Oh. But she was saying, so I was very curious about this. She wasn't saying anything about you, no shade.
She's never introduced herself to me. Whoa.
So in the book, you talk about how when your mom came, there were no Korean grocery stores.
Right.
And Nancy Coleman said, we have 2 H Marts in our town.
We do.
Is that true?
Yeah.
2 H Marts within driving distance of your house?
Yeah. Okay, so you guys are getting the good part of this. It was cut out of the book, right? I think I cut it out because for space. But there's a section where I describe the very kind of surreal experience of being like I must have been 14 or something, and before I came out to my parents as gay, I dated girls, and I had a girlfriend in high school, and we had a spot. It was like an Italian restaurant in this like one shopping center in the suburbs of Atlanta, and it was important to me at the time, and then it was overtaken by a fried chicken place, and I was so angry. I was like, oh my god, that place means so much to me. Like, not anymore, but like, I don't even know where she is now, but we didn't stay friends, but I'm sure she's doing fine. But she, that place was really important to me, or I thought it was, and then I watched the Blockbuster, 2 stores down, they went into Chapter 11, and then it was replaced by, I don't remember, some other Korean thing, and then the Harris Teeter became an H Mart, and then the little store to the left became a bubble tea store, which wasn't Korean, but it was still Asian. Right. Anyway, that kept happening in my neighborhood, and I remember when I was little, I was like, why is everything turning Korean? And I really resented it. I was like, you are taking away my childhood stores, like Blockbuster. Blockbuster's forever. So I thought, and then, and so when I thought about that, I thought back on it as an adult, and what a gift to realize, so late that your childhood was actually quite diverse. Like, so my childhood was like, I took it for granted that I was surrounded by Koreans and Korean people, and it took writing the book to realize, oh my god, this was a very specific place, and a really beautiful place to be Korean, and so I think hopefully that came across to Nancy, but...
Oh, no, definitely, but yeah. I think that this idea, so that for your mom and dad, so part of the story of the Asian American experience, right, the history of it is, before 1965, the population was less than 1% Asian American, and so because of the immigration reforms, that's what brought more Asians to America. Right. And your parents were part of that, and so many of the Asians who first came were alone.
Yeah.
Right? They were outliers. And so this experience, which isn't to say that you might not have felt any kind of estrangement, but I find it interesting, like the idea that the Korean things were coming in, this was an intrusion on your life.
Yeah.
And I think about, so you quote, one of the things I love in Eric's book is all the literary references. So one of them is, he quotes the Russian literary theorist Viktor Shklovsky, this amazing quote where he says that, art exists to make one feel things, to make the stone stony. And part of Shklovsky's theory is also known as bestrangement. And
this is more than I know.
but I think
Nice.
I feel like part of what you're talking about,
right.
And I'm wondering if there's something unique in the Asian American experience, that the idea of bestrangement is that you make the familiar unfamiliar.
Yeah.
So is there something in that, so the familiarity of your childhood in a way became unfamiliar to you, unfamiliar again through the process of writing? Is there something about being Asian American that Korean food is both familiar but also unfamiliar in its context? I don't know if I'm getting too esoteric here.
No, that was great. That's a great question. Wow, that was awesome. Good setup. That makes me think about a lot of things. First, I forgot to finish my thought, which was it's supposed to be I would be a horrible Amy Schumer. But that fried chicken place that replaced the Italian place is now my favorite fried chicken place in Atlanta. So it's called Joy Chicken if you want to go there. Anyway, okay, so about the stones being stonier, I should admit that I stole that from Nigella Lawson, who studied Romance languages at Oxford. But she said that as she was toasting walnuts, and it was so clear to me because she was saying that when you toast walnuts, they become more walnutty. I mean, it's like, it sounds obvious, but it's if you've ever like cooked with nuts, then you know that toasting the nuts tastes very different. So I love that idea though, because what the criticism is saying is that when you write something down, it becomes more permanent. And I think this constant like battle I've had, internally as a Korean American, as someone who's straddling two nations and two identities, and having like my Italian place being replaced by my future favorite fried chicken place. What that means is the two languages are often at odds, and that was really hard growing up. I mean, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but I don't know if you had to do this, but I would have to sign my own permission slips. I would have to when I got into trouble, I would just like sign it myself. And I mean, not that I got into trouble much, but and I would resent it. I'd be like, I'm like my own, you feel like you're your own parent sometimes when you're an Asian American growing up with parents who don't speak, great English. And even with this, with this book, I think it was writing down the recipes and the food. Food was this like, how do I not get too, lofty or hoity-toity with this? But I think food is something that sometimes doesn't have language, so it's really nice. It's a nice like meeting point for, for two cultures. And for me, it was a really lovely year for my mother and me to cook together. And when we did it, it felt so nice for me to cook dishes from my childhood, to not just refamiliarize myself with these dishes, and also just to learn how to make them. I was like, oh, I had no idea that's how you did it. But it was also the concept around revisiting a taste memory that really fueled the book. Because I've always said, I don't know if you feel this way, but the aim isn't necessarily to replicate the, Aunt Georgia's fried chicken, or like, it's not to replicate the version that you remember as an 11-year-old. Like, that version probably, maybe it wasn't that good, because over time we get better at cooking, and then the aunt cooks that casserole better, and the cousin ends up perfecting that cranberry salad or whatever. And so I think I realized that I was playing with time here. I was playing with this notion of, the clarity that can happen when you bring the past into the present. And so that was something that really illuminated my idea of the world and my family and legacy. And I love, like, isn't it lovely to cook something from your childhood and to not chase the thing as it was, but to chase the memory of it. And because that memory is a platonic ideal. It's like, everyone thinks that the Dunkaroos were better than they actually are, probably. And if you guys, okay, good, you guys grew up with that. If you've ever eaten one recently, though, it's like, they're not that good. And so I think it's like a thing, and I think that really helped me explore more than just the food. And food has always just been a conduit for me. I think we're maybe known for, food is really just, some people want us to write more about the food, but it's always just an entry point for everything else, right?
Yeah. It's a lens to look at the world, but definitely. Somebody asked me last night, somebody who couldn't make it tonight, the one question she wanted to ask you is, she said, my mom, my aunts, they never had a recipe. Nobody ever wrote anything down. Yeah. So how does something change when there's a recipe? I mean, you say, you have this line here, it's not just that my mother's generation didn't write down their recipes. It's that their food wasn't cooked with measurements in mind at all. All that knowledge is in the hands and in the heart. And you talk about this concept of sonmat. Is that how you say it? Sonmat. Could you tell people a little bit about that? And
it's in the intro, one of the intro essays, but sonmat translates to hand taste. And I think it's such a smart culinary term. I love the Korean language because there are so many food-specific words, lots of onomatopoeia as well, just words that have specifically to do with the taste of sesame oil or like stuff like that. But sonma, I like it because it describes the process of cooking with your hands and versus with your brain. I think that's kind of like what the idea, and also this notion that you can chase your mother's recipe and you can write it down and you can get close, which is the effort of my cookbook, to like get close enough to my mother's food, but explaining that you will never actually be able to taste it because it has to come from her hands, and the person who cooks the dish is always going to know how to flavor it the best. And it's also I think the idea that part of the food, part of the taste comes from their being. And so I often think about how we talk about it all the time at NYT Cooking. My editor, Genevieve Ko, she's sort of the one who helms everything. She's like the recipe goddess. And she is someone who really wants to figure out a way to offer recipes that not just give people a meal for the night, but also to help them to fish, It's like to help them to cook in a natural way. And because I like that effort, because it's a very noble effort to try to teach someone how to cook and not just how to make a recipe, And I think sonma, that type of food is the type of food that you make without a recipe. You make because you just know what it needs and you taste it as you go. And that kind of cooking is invaluable. And it's also a cooking that's, I also think it was insurance for me, because I think I knew that I could never really we can write it down, but it's really hard to approximate. So that's why this book has so many moments that say season to taste, or plus more to taste, or because Korean ingredients in America are all so vast and they differ from brand to brand, and a lot of granular things here. But I think I like the notion that cooking isn't just a skill to learn, but it's also a talent. It's like an essence, and I don't know. I think that's really special. It's like a nice, because when you taste that kind of food, you can taste it. It's very personal.
I love the detail about how even time is different for your mom. So that you were saying, she was saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you said, no, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, yeah. And she's like, no, that's not my time. So you had to translate every moment of the recipe.
Yeah. Okay, so this was a cucumber kimchi in the kimchi chapter, and there's a step where you have to blanch the cucumber briefly so that it's pliable enough to stuff it with the delicious filling. But my mom was explaining how long to dunk it, and she was like, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I was like, that's that's not, I can't write that in a recipe. That's not real. And she was like, well, that's my time. That's real for me. And I was like, okay. So I had to figure it out. It was 2 Mississippis, by the way. But,
okay. But now there were some great sounds when you were talking about the onomatopoeia. So what's the sound of the cutting?
When you're making kimchi, you have a head of napa cabbage, and I think one thing my mom does, I don't know if other people do this, but you score the root end just a little bit, and then you tear the rest. And versus just taking the knife and quartering it, what you end up with are these ruffled edges. And when my mom was explaining it, she was like, score it, and then asa. And I was like, okay, what? It's like, what? What'd you just say? What'd you call me? And then we were laughing about it because it was 7 a.m. and I hadn't had much sleep, and we had a lot of mornings like that. But anyway.
It's fantastic. Do you mind just saying one more? Because I really was curious what this sounded like. It was the sound of the cucumber skins.
Oh, what is that? Kodu.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, Korean has a lot of onomatopoeia in a really fun way. I love it. It's great.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, in a way, it would have been great if you could write the entire recipe in just sound next to the other. I know.
For the next book.
Maybe, yes. So one of the, if we can talk a little bit about, so one thing that's interesting, right, is that it's partly a Korean cookbook, but as you point out, some people are going to say, this is not the way I make this recipe. There are all these questions of the dreaded word of authenticity. Do you mind if I just read part of what you wrote here? These recipes are Korean American because the people who cook them identify as such. There's more than one way to be Korean. We are infinite. The more we can distance ourselves from this impulse to define entire cultures, cuisines, and experiences as monoliths, the more empathetic we'll become as cooks, and the easier it will be to finally dispel the myth of authenticity in food. which is so beautifully put. But this is a real problem for us just as food writers, but especially if you're writing about something to do from the immigrant experience. So how did you wrestle with that?
How long do we have? Yeah, I think, thanks for reading that. That was like probably one of the last things I wrote. And I remember because I was editing on the page, I was like by the time it's on the page, you're not really supposed to change that much. But that whole paragraph was just like, and I inserted the thing. And to the point where my blurbers, sorry, this is not interesting probably, but to the point where my blurbers didn't even get that section. And I was like, it's really horrifying. You have to like send your book off to your heroes to like review, and then it's not even the finished copy. Anyway, okay, where do I start? I think when I first started writing about Korean food, it was actually, not that long ago. And I wrote a piece about kimchi fried rice and like coming out to my parents at Food 52. That was in 2018 or something. But then after that, I didn't really write that many Korean pieces, but that turned into a book deal. And then the book deal was about like writing more of those. And I wrote a piece, immediately after that, I wrote my first piece for the Times, and it was a Korean piece. And so that one had a lot of eyes on it, and I got hate mail. I got like people who were like, how dare you, that's not accurate, that's not how my mom does it, and blah, blah, blah. And then I was so terrified. I didn't know that people out there were like mean, and I had been coddled my whole life. No, just kidding. I didn't know that this was a thing. Like I was just talking about my own experience, and I thought I was doing something like interesting with this thing, and then I called Priya, actually. We have a mutual friend, mutual colleague, Priya Krishna. She wrote a book called Indianish, and she, also she's a food reporter at the Times, but before we were colleagues, I was like a huge fan of hers, and I called her. I was like, this happened to me. Has this ever happened to you? And she laughed, and she was like, welcome to the club. And so, and then that started a chain reaction. Nick Sharma, an Indian food writer, wrote a tweet, and then Samin Nosrat, a Persian-American food writer, wrote a tweet about how your greatest critics are from your own community. And I've spent years like psychoanalyzing this, and because I think my explanation is kind of, I get it, I kind of understand. It comes from a scarcity mindset, I think. I don't know if you agree with this, but I think these Korean people who are also food writers, and maybe, and they saw a piece that they didn't write, or that didn't align with their own idea about what that should look like. And I think to them, they were like, oh man, we had one opportunity to write about kimchi in the New York Times, and this guy effed it up. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that was a perspective. That's so weird. But also, I really understand it. It comes from just like decades of being told that your food is not mainstream, being told that you're not, ever going to be on the cover, or like, I think that really weighs on you. And so I think that's why when things started happening for me, and I got the job at the Times, and all of those things happened because of personal relationships that I had and people I really loved working with, but it was also just such a triumph. It felt like such a win to have like Korean food in the Times at all, and that was a really big deal for me because, luckily most of the feedback, consisted of people emailing with, crying emoji, like, wow, it's so cool to see this dish in the New York Times, and I think people take it very seriously to have their cuisine finally represented, to finally see yourself on the page after not seeing yourself on the page for so long. It's a very overwhelming experience. Very humbling and very special. And so I think that's something I recognize. And I think it's all part of the same, the haters and the lovers, like we're all part of the same kind of, history in media.
Yeah, and like you said, the scarcity, because we're not allowed to have, Korean is supposed to just be one thing, because it's something that's sort of easily digestible, for lack of a better word. Sure. And so part of allowing for all the different experiences is that those experiences can be shared.
Yeah, right.
So, but now, so that we can talk a little bit about the food.
Yeah.
Right. I know we've talked about all these other things. I'm wondering, so it's interesting that Korean food is actually now almost like, can we say mainstream?
Yeah, it's like having it's a thing.
It's a thing.
We're not supposed to say it's having a moment, right? Because that's like.
Well, and it's been a long moment if it has.
It's a long
like,
moment,
so
right,
it has sort of entered the American mainstream.
I do recognize that. Yeah.
Part of it. And so I'm curious. So for you, like, so if we think that the famous Korean dishes that people who aren't Korean, who aren't that familiar with the food, they would know what kimchi is,
right.
bulgogi, kalbi. What do you think people should know that they don't know that isn't one of those greatest hits?
You know what's interesting? I wrote a piece for the Times, my like 10 essential Korean recipes, and I had a whole other draft of that essay. I mean, you wrote one.
Yeah.
It's really hard to write those. Those are devastatingly hard to write. It like eats at your soul. Anyway, that piece had a different draft that was it was a much more boring draft, but it was about the dictionary. And I've always been fascinated by the English dictionary because it shows, it's not supposed to show the valuation of culture, though arguably it can, but I think what it shows is the pattern of like prominence. And so in 2021, all of these Korean food words were entered into the Oxford English Dictionary anyway, and that usually trickles to Merriam-Webster, but samgyeopsal, I know, that's in the English dictionary
Wow.
now. So that's something that I think people should know. Not just because it's in the English dictionary, but because apparently it's like prominent enough to be, I don't know, not italicized in some style guides,
Fantastic,
right?
yeah.
It's not a foreign word anymore. And then I think kimbap is probably something that was added recently. Yeah, I think there are dishes like that happen, and it's not arbitrary. It's like there are reasons. There's a reason bibimbap was in the dictionary before gochujang was. We all know what like gochujang is now, which is like a fermented chili paste. But I have this theory that it's because bibimbap was like served on Korean Airlines. And so people who were traveling from the two countries were like learning about this dish because it was the meal offering. And they're like, whoa, this rocks. And then it's like, what's that sauce? And then now gochujang's a thing. So it's funny, you see the order in which things get added to the dictionary, and that shows you like some kind of like sociological, I don't know, cultural resonance. This is a theory of mine. Ask a real linguist, I guess. But I observe the dictionary every year and like what gets added, and it's fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I guess also like Roy Choi and David Chang started.
Right.
I mean, it's complicated, the story of how these things move in, and this whole question of what is italicized and why do we italicize and what do we consider to be foreign enough, and these are all issues we deal with as journalists all the time. And
Man, so in our time, we saw the New York Times stop hyphenating Asian American, Korean American, Japanese American, Filipino American. Pretty cool. I remember because I really looked to your Asian American food column. It was the one in the magazine about what is an Asian American cuisine, right? And that was, you had to hyphenate all the Asian American in that. And I think I remember you tweeting about it too. I was like, I know that she didn't want to, but she had to because of the style guide. And
well, there's another thing which
you should just go back and take them out now.
I know. Like, can we do that?
It's not the rule anymore. Yeah, I think you can.
I know. Well, this is a funny aside, which is that I grew up in Hawaii, and when we first wrote about poke, which everybody knows what poke is now, but there was a time when nobody outside of Hawaii knew what poke was, and the Times put an accent on the
Oh
E.
yeah, right.
And people in Hawaii got very angry.
Of course.
And it was in my article.
Yeah. And then you
talk about getting hate from your own. So
it's interesting because like language doesn't always line up with the Times. Sorry, not like our employer, but like the Times. But you know, it's interesting that way. But I think what's really important for people to know, and actually the people at the Times do this too, and we have conversations every day with the style desk. It's like language changes, so you have to like adapt to language, and it's not the other way around. I think you have to adapt. I mean, I think I think language has to adapt to people, is what I'm saying.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Since you are, in addition to being a writer, so you create recipes. You're not just carrying on traditions. You're making up your own holia. And so I'm curious whether have you had any? So two questions here. Have you had any interesting accidents in the kitchen while you're cooking? And have you ever made a dish where you really thought these ingredients would work together and it was a disaster?
Ooh, yeah, of course.
Really?
Lots.
Really?
Oh, lots. Some of my colleagues are very efficient. Like Melissa Clark probably never messes up in the kitchen.
That's true.
And Yewande Komolafe is very like experienced, and they've both been doing it so much longer than me. So I'm a little messier. My kitchen's literally just like so messy all the time because I'm not really good at cleaning as I go, which is something my mom tells me. Anyway, all this to say, yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think of the biggest disasters. Oh, I have one. There's a new chickpea salad on NYT Cooking that not enough people are making, actually. It's like, that was like a really delicious recipe, but it was in this big salad package that came out yesterday in the paper. And the first version of it had black sesame seeds, because, I thought sesame and black sesame seeds, like that would taste good, but wow, did it look like ants. It looked like,
oh wow,
it looked awful. And I knew it looked awful, but I was like, maybe. And then I messaged my editor, Genevieve, and I was like, does this look like ants to you? And she didn't just say it looked like ants, she was like, oh my God, I was terrified. I was like so scared to open the thumbnail, because it looked awful. And she was like, yeah, maybe like try something else. So I actually just took out the seeds completely, and it looked way more beautiful. And it tasted cleaner, actually.
Oh, okay. But you didn't want to try white sesame and nothing?
I did try the white sesame.
You didn't,
it still looked like ants.
It still
or it looked like
right.
a different bug.
Oh,
but, yeah, so. And I don't know, if you have trypophobia, it's just like the fear of like holes, I think. Anyway.
Oh, wow.
It's like.
I mean, what about ants on a log and other dishes that kind of...
Oh, I think maybe those are like, because the raisins are so big,
I guess so.
But man, when they're like little, it was weird though. I think it has to also do with the fact that the chickpeas are circular. So just like having a circle with like an egg shape, like an insect egg shape with, sorry. Anyway, we can move on.
No, it's great.
Did I answer both questions?
No, yeah, no, I think that, but it's, so some of the unexpected ingredients in your book, there's one is it your mom's recipe or your version of your mom's recipe for LA style called there's Sprite.
There is
Sprite. Which I totally resonated with me because 7-Up is used in some Filipino cooking.
Right,
and so was that an ingredient she would have used in Korea?
Ooh, good question. I actually think so. I think it's quite a trend in Korea to use sodas, sugary sodas, to marinate these grilled meats. It's supposed to tenderize it. I don't know if I believe that, to be honest, but the reason my mom uses it in her marinade for these grilled short ribs is because it adds a little moisture, which is nice, so it's not like caked on, and so you end up with like a clean like flavor in a grill. But it also adds sweetness, and you want that caramelization when you're cooking. So, she's always someone who's trying to figure out ways to add sweetness without adding granulated sugar, so she uses soda.
And is Spam still part of your life?
It is. It's less, well, that's not true. I eat it now as an adult in my budae-jjigae. So I make kimchi jjigae, which is like a stew made out of kimchi, like really like old kimchi too, and really like funky. You make a stew, and then the next day when I reheat it, I'll add like more onions or something, and maybe like some sausage or Spam. And then the next day I'll add like noodles and then like a slice of American cheese. It's like a thing, and it has like 9 lives. And so by the time it's the end of the week, I should probably be throwing it out. But it's kimchi, so it's like in my mind it's okay. It's like still okay, and it's like funkier and it tastes good. I never get sick, but I just keep reheating it because that's what you do. You just like leave it there and you just keep reheating it. You just kill the bacteria before each meal.
There you go. Yeah, and the Spam will last
Sorry,
forever.
I'm not giving you much confidence. The recipes have not hurt anyone yet, so they're fine.
Well, so thinking about creating recipes, being a writer, you see resonances in the two crafts.
Ooh, oh my God. Okay, so I had the most dramatic week. Sorry, I regret saying that. Well, today, my very first cover story, reported, kind of like Kim Severson style, Priya Krishna reported story. Because we have food reporters and we have cooking writers, and they're both very different, but I think both are interested in the other's profession. So they sent me to Chicago, and I reported on the Chicago dog, and that piece came out, and it was so fun to exercise that craft, that muscle, that had nothing to do with recipes or cooking, really. I mean, it had to do with food, but there was a recipe at the end, but that was barely part of the process of developing this story. Meanwhile, on the side, I'm developing like 5 salad recipes for this like other thing. And they're both such deep pleasures that are very different. And I think the reporting kind of person, like the Priya Krishna or the Kimchi, they're very extroverted, and that type of writing is so it's like technical, but it's also just so like sociological and fascinating, and that exercises the left side of my brain, and then the cooking exercises the right side of my brain, I think. So it's I always think of it as the reporters are like fiction writers, and the cooking writers are kind of like poets, because our constraints are just I think cooking is so much more about form, and I don't know if you agree with this, or I don't know if I agree with it, but and I think reporting is a little more about narrative and story. So I always thought that was fascinating.
We can't say the reporters are fiction writers.
No, we can't. We should.
They're factual writers, but narratively
not on the record
focused.
anyway.
For sure. I know that we should open up to questions from the audience. So I think we have a microphone on each side of the stage. So please feel free to come up, or we can also come to you. Do we have a question? Oh, please, do you want to come up, or?
Oh, there's a microphone.
Or just
actually, we can hear you.
We'll bring you a microphone.
Hi.
Were you first? Okay.
Hi, Leslie. We met before.
So thank you so much. It was so interesting. I think the ants are probably my favorite part of your talk tonight. But so 2 things. One's a comment, which is, I think, too big for tonight, but I want to make it, which is I was so happy when you all were talking about the fact that there's more than one way to be Korean, and that to get away from the whole idea of the monolith. But I was thinking about what a paradox it is, because we still refer to the Asian American experience, the African American experience, the Jewish American experience. And so I think that might be too big to talk about, but or you could talk about it. And I have one hardcore question, which is, why did Atlanta become such a destination for Korean American or for Korean immigration? So right. I'm sort of sneaking 2 questions in here.
No, thank you so much. Well, I can answer the first one, which is I've thought about this paradox a lot, because I'm trying to convince people that I'm a singular story, my mother's a singular cook, like this is just one version of Korean American, and at the same time, the reason I called it Korean American is so that when people pick it up, they feel seen. And I've always felt this way about, I think the easiest way to explain this is to describe what I feel about memoir writing, which is, I think the best first-person writing is a kind of narrative that serves the purpose for the reader. I think people think that narrative writing, memoir writing, is supposed to be about the author, but I actually think the point of offering up your own story is to connect it to the larger world and to resonate with other people. And so my goal is always to write in a way that is so specific that by the time someone reads it, they feel like they're on the page, and they are, because I think it's in the specifics that you get universal truths. And that's why we report at the Times, that's why we interview people, because when you get more stories and more specifics, you end up with like the nuance of a particular experience. And so yeah, it is a paradox, because it's, at once I want people to not say that all Korean Americans cook like those 90 recipes or whatever, but I also want Korean Americans who pick up the book to feel like they're on the page. And I think, I don't think they're exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and the second question.
Atlanta. Why Atlanta? Yeah.
You know, I mean, I feel like I kind of explained in the way that, I mean, you know, in the 80s there was kind of a wave, but I don't know. I really think it has to do with, I can explain it from my uncle's point of view. So my Uncle Young moved to Atlanta before everyone else, all the other cousins, and he actually went to New York first. Lots of Koreans went to New York, LA, New Jersey, a lot in Texas too, actually, but I think Atlanta was sort of metropolitan enough. It was like a city. Julia Roberts was popular in Korea at the time. That's why my dad said he moved there.
I love it.
But yeah, she's from Atlanta. That's pretty cool. A lot of cool people came out of Atlanta, and I think Atlanta had the draw of like America, but it was not as intense as New York or LA. I think that's why my family moved there anyway. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm really looking forward to reading your book cover to cover. So I'm Korean American also, maybe a little bit older, and I grew up with parents who presented me 3 career choices, lawyer, engineer, doctor. And I picked one of them. I was not particularly good at math and science. So I was just curious about how you ended up in your career path in food and writing, and how your parents reacted to that, responded to that, and how they feel about it today, now that you're published and writing for the New York Times, which I think is like, the next level. So just would love to hear that experience.
Yeah, it's funny, when I got the Times job, my mom, she was like happy for me, but she was sort of not that impressed. She was like, I was like, I think I got this job, Mom. And I went to the laundry room where she was like doing laundry, and I was like, I think I got this job. And she was like, oh, that'll be nice. I think you'll enjoy that. That'll be fun. I was like, and then, but I think the point though is like, I don't have normal parents and or normal Korean parents. I don't think she ever really cared what I did. It was always just like, as long as you're happy and find the thing that you're good at. And my mom was a ceramicist. She was like an artist. And my dad, well, he sold like beepers and cell phones, but he was a good singer. And my brother was an artist. He went to art school, and now he leads like teams who build the special effects for like Marvel films. So I think he and I kind of maybe in high school or something, there were moments of tension. And I think me becoming a writer was a lesser evil than me wanting to become a pop star, which is the first thing I tried to do. So I was like a singer, and my mom, it was like junior year of high school. We used to always do these like Tuesday sushi dinners in landlocked Georgia. And we would, Georgia's not landlocked, but in Atlanta, landlocked Atlanta, I should say. But we would, I remember there was a day in junior year, she was like, if you want to do this thing, like, let's do it right. You're gonna apply to Berklee College of Music. We're gonna get you voice lessons. We're gonna like do this. And then I was like, actually, I was like, I think I just want to go to a regular college. So I went to regular college, and then I explored this thing that I wanted to explore, which was literature. And I don't know, I just wanted to be a student. And I loved it so much that I went on to start a PhD and drop out of one. Recently, that grad school I went to published an article of all the famous people who dropped out. And I wasn't on the list because I'm not famous, but Timothy Chalamet and Jake Gyllenhaal were on there, and wow. I love that. I love being part of that genealogy. All right, I think I answered all of that. Yeah, but they were always really cool about it, honestly. Yeah. Hi, thank you.
Hi. Full disclosure, I'm covering this for the Gazette, but
oh, cool.
A journalist.
Just kidding.
Don't be afraid.
Never trust journalists.
It's sort of a two-part question. I wanted to know, how do you first approach writing a recipe or developing a recipe, and how do you know when it's done?
Oh, yeah. I think I'm really lucky in that I don't know if everyone else feels this way. Usually I have a lot of colleagues and friends who just like turn it in when it's due. Which is like a good thing to do, actually, because there's always an editing process, there's always a tester, and there's a back and forth that happens. But I always have a moment personally when I like taste the final thing, and it's after I've been like slaving over it, and then I taste it, and it just know it's right, It's like that bite. It's exactly right, and I think that's kind of how I like to cook and feed people too. Like I love seeing the surprise on people's faces when they take that first bite, and there is pleasure to foods that like slowly build, and you can eat a lot of it. Like Nigella Lawson called it bowl food, because it's like each bite is the same as the last, and that's a particular joy, like cereal. But I think with recipe development, I'm often trying to surprise people. So there's a moment at the end when I really do feel like I've gotten it, and I know because I can like go to bed, and that's like a big deal. And so I'm trying to chase that. But the process, just I don't know, I guess real quick, it really depends. But I think I've come up, my process is really very loose in the beginning. I know a lot of people. I don't think she'll mind me saying this, but Kate Chun and Rick Martinez, they're two developers who have been in the industry way longer than me, and they're very experienced. They write the recipe first. They like have the final draft already because they already know what's going to happen because they've cooked so much in their lives. When I was developing the milk bread, which is like it's a recipe at the end of the book. he was like, just make sure that it gets to like 185 degrees. And I was like, how do you know that? And he was like, I don't know, because I've made bread my whole life. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. So I think there's something to be said for experience, and I just don't have it. So I think I'm someone who cooks very messily in the beginning, but I also cook, this sounds really annoying, but I cook like, in the way that I write to think, I think I cook to think. And so sometimes I have an idea, but it's not like clear enough yet until I'm just like going, and then I also do that because I want to inhabit like what the reader is going to go through, and if I don't want to do it, then no way in hell, a reader's going to want to do it. So I think there's a lot of just active motion in the recipe development process, and I think it's that I love that part of my job because it's the active part. It's like, I have cooking days and I have writing days, and my title is very luckily like cooking writer technically in the HR like forum or whatever. So I think it's really, I feel really blessed. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. When my 18-year-old Korean-American daughter who's gay read your sweet piece in the Times about cooking spicy seafood stew for your boyfriend, I think she felt seen, so thank you. I have a question for you. Some of your recipes are very Korean. Some of your recipes, especially in the Times, transcend cultural boundaries. And there's so much controversy around authenticity and appropriation. Do you feel any anxiety or trepidation when your recipes might be, I don't know, you're getting out of your lane? Do you feel that, both of you as writers, when you're developing recipes?
Wow.
Do you?
I have many thoughts on cultural appropriation, but you should
I know.
start.
Oh my God.
We could be here all night.
Yeah, I certainly do. I think when it's not part of my culture, I may be a little more, well, I don't know. That's not true. I think when it's not part of my culture, I do more research probably. And I try to make sure the 100 words at the top are really like airtight. Because you want to, it's a responsibility to, when you're publishing a recipe, whether it's part of your culture or not, it's a huge responsibility to make sure that the people whose culture it is from feel like you got it right. I really want that all the time. And so, yeah, I think I still have nightmares about it. Sure, I personally am always. I think that's what keeps me like really, and also like we have like amazing editors, but you want to make sure that you have provided enough context, and you want to make sure that you've done your research. And I think of those recipes as it's like your own kind of reporting. Like I did a miso soup recently, and did a lot of research for it before I put that up, before I did that, because it's a big deal to cook another culture's food. But I think everything just involves, all that you need is a little empathy and knowing that you're not the expert of that cuisine. And I think it's important to always just like do your research. Yeah, I think that's something that just a lot of people don't do their research. And so, and that's where the trouble comes in. And when it doesn't come from a place that is of empathy. I think empathy is the answer to everything, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the research and respect is really important. But another part of it is that cultural appropriation is really about access. So the people who have, it's about power, right?
Yes.
So if the dominant group is the one that's always representing the cuisines of the non-dominant groups, something's happening. So I think it's more about who is telling these stories. So the Times has really made an effort in recent years to just bring more voices to the newspaper, and I think that we're part of that also.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like this links back to this other idea of the Asian American experience, which is completely varied, but that there is also this sense of solidarity. So the hope would be that maybe because we come from non-dominant cultures within this culture, that we will bring a special respect and empathy to other non-dominant cultures when we represent them. That doesn't mean that, by the way, anybody can write about anything, anybody can cook anything. I believe that cooking we want to invite, where nobody's discouraging anything. It's all just about respect and wanting to see more voices, not fewer, out there. So that's
Well
how I
said.
think about it.
That's really well said. I have a story, actually, a quick one. The opposite happened to me, where I wrote about egg rice, and that's a dish from my childhood. It's like a very Korean thing, but it's also a very Japanese thing. It's also very Mexican and Cubans, like Puerto Ricans, like everyone has an egg rice. Maybe you do. And I think what was really funny was this Asian man tweeted a screenshot of my story and cut my name out. And he was like, oh great, like white people took egg rice or something. And I knew what he was trying to do. He was like trying to get clout on the internet. He was trying to call out the New York Times. It went viral in the like the Malaysian community, like on Twitter, I think. So it was getting like retweeted. It's like, oh great, like white people are like, now they think they discovered egg rice. And then of course these people never actually clicked the article and read it, and because the article was about like every single culture that has egg rice. And then there was a backlash. A lot of my readers came to my defense eventually when they found that tweet, and so he got canceled for trying to cancel me. So I ignored it until now. I didn't respond. I just like left it. I was like, ugh, whatever.
Yeah, you can
So
get
that
it from all
happens.
sides.
Yeah, it's crazy. There was a question here.
Hello, thanks so much for coming. You are really a delight to listen to.
Thank you.
I have a question about you when you were a youngster or growing up in Atlanta. Was there a food particular that you liked to eat all the time? Or was it American food or Korean food or a cross between the two? What was your favorite thing as a kid growing up?
Yeah, I like, that's such a lovely, easy question. Thank you for asking. I really loved shrimp fried rice. There were so many Korean, like fast casual Korean restaurants for Koreans, and I always talk about how like Manhattan Korean food doesn't really taste as great to me because it's focused on the audience, whereas the Korean food in Atlanta feels like it's just for the people, and so that it tastes very like honest. But shrimp fried rice was always my order for some reason. I loved rice. Like I just loved anything that was rice, curry rice. Any fried rice was like my thing that I ordered. And then so recently I published a shrimp fried rice recipe, and as I was making it, I was like, wow, I used to love this. I totally forgot about it. And that was a really lovely moment where I just like remembered how much shrimp fried rice I ate growing up. On the other hand, I often write about fast food. I kind of write about fast food because I'm always trying to like insert I'm always trying to like bring the times like a little bit like a peg down, but from the fanciness that they have a reputation for. But I think also those spaces are often like communal spaces for immigrants, and those food experiences are very nostalgic for people who didn't grow up with those dishes. So I mean examples are kind of like McDonald's and I wrote about sweet tomatoes recently. It's kind of a deep cut for, I don't know if anyone here knows, that person does, if you've been in the Southeast or California. Anyway, it's a salad bar, really delicious. And I think both of those experiences are a part of I think they make up why I cook the way I do now. I often think about that, and I think it's really special. I think that's something that that I wanted to celebrate in the book, like what happens when you have an experience that is straddling, two different types of worlds, and the food is really delicious. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Well, we know tomorrow's a special day.
Uh-oh.
It's Eric's birthday tomorrow.
Oh, it is.
Happy birthday!
So, I did not bake a cake, but we did get 2 little cakes, and we lost the matches. But we're all going to sing to you. So,
Can I record this?
so join me and sing. I can't lead. Happy birthday to you. Happy
Oh my God, thank you.
birthday to
Oh, thank you
you.
so much. These look delicious.
Happy birthday, dear Eric. Happy birthday to you.
Is there a special food you eat on your birthday or ever, or that your mother made for you for your birthday?
Oh my God, thank you for saying that. You just reminded me I need to eat that. Miyeokguk is like a seaweed soup that you eat for your birthday. It has a good story, actually. It's usually, everyone thinks that it's for your birthday. It's for the person whose birthday it is, but it's actually for the mother. It's like a very symbolic soup. It's because it's a thing that heals the mother after she's had birth. So I love that in Korea, the birthday is also like a reference to the mother who birthed. I think about that sometimes. So I have to eat that tomorrow. Yeah. This is so amazing. Thank you guys so much. That's so sweet. We should cut into it and
We'll
have
cut
it.
it.
Cool.
So join us all and have a little cake, and Eric is going to go in back and sign a few books or personalized books.
And I faked blue on it, by the way, so just... Yeah, I'd love to meet you guys. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.